All right. Hello. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to EITC Awareness Day. Thank you for celebrating with us. We're very lucky today because we have a great speaker who's going to share with us some information. But let me just say a quick hello. My name is Janice, and I'm the director of the Low Income Taxpayer Clinic. We have Jim Leith, and we also have Asia, who you'll meet a little bit more later. She's our LITC paralegal. You'll learn a little bit more about us in general as we go along. Please feel free to put any questions you have in the Q&A box in the chat. We would like this to be interactive if it's appropriate at the time. If not, we'll certainly leave some time at the end for questions as well. So, all right. Well, welcome, everyone. Thanks. Jim, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Janice, and thank you, Asia. Yeah, this is Jim Leith. I'm the IRS's local taxpayer advocate for the state of Maryland. Typically, my job and that of my case advocates is to help taxpayers resolve issues that they're having with IRS after they file their tax return. Either they're not getting access to their refund, or they're having problems with the collections function, or they would like to challenge a prior audit and are unsure, how to do so. We can help with that. And that's typically what we do 360 days a year. There are a number of days, however, where I like to go out and into the community, such as today, and try to talk about some of the mistakes that we're seeing that taxpayers have made that result in a delay in the issuance of their refund and their need to utilize our services. So it's somewhat self-preservation here, saying, I really don't want to see the same types of cases that we're working now in the upcoming months. And some of it's, you don't want to wait either, right? You don't want your refund delayed. We've worked hard. We've earned the refund that we're requesting. What are some tips that you could share with me that would prevent that from ever happening? And that's the purpose of today's presentation. There's lots of information contained in this PowerPoint. This is not a proprietary document. It's certainly available to be shared with the public. And the reason I say that, there's a lot of helpful links contained in the PowerPoint. If you'd want more information on a particular credit that we're going to cover today, I would encourage you to do that. And again, there'll be some forms we're going to cover. There's some IRS jargon that's inevitably pops into these. So if, again, you need further explanations, as Janice mentioned, there will be an opportunity for us to clarify. But if you just take one or two important items from today's presentations, then you'll be in a better place, and I'll feel as though we've accomplished what it is we needed to do today. And that's, again, provide awareness of some of the tips that are causing taxpayers' refunds are delayed and necessitating the need for assistance from Taxpayer Advocate Service or our colleagues over at the Maryland Volunteer Lawyers Services, which is Asia and Janice's organization. So next slide, please. Okay. So filing season officially opened up on Monday, January 24th, right? Maybe a couple of you have filed. If you haven't, we need you to stop right now. We're at the red light, okay? We need you to follow some of these tax tips we're going to cover to avoid common errors that delay return processing. Once you've done that, the light's turned green, you're ready to go and file. And we're ready to go on to the next slide. So one of the common mistakes we see, you see on the right-hand side saying a big red triangle. No, that's where taxpayers eager to file their tax return use their last pay stub, which they, in their looking at it, it appears to contain all the income that they've earned for the year, and it appears to contain all the withholding. Okay, but that's really not the official record of income and withholdings. That's going to be your W-2. So employers have an obligation to share that W-2 with the Social Security Administration to ensure you're credited for quarters that you've worked for retirement purposes. And they in turn will share with the Internal Revenue Service. So the first tip is do not use your end of, your last pay stub that covered the period, December 15th or December 16th to December 31st. And it may have what you believe an accurate accumulative total of wages and withholding. You need to stay patient and wait for the issuance of your W-2. Next slide, please. Okay. And this is why this is important. We have an organization within the IRS individual taxpayer tax return preparing taxpayer processing centers, a unit called the Integrity and Verification Operations, IVO, in the IRS jargon. So they're going to compare the income and withholding that you reported against the forms W-2 that were forwarded by your employer. And if there is a mismatch, that return is going to be dropped, pulled out of the processing, pulled out of the pipeline, so to speak, and put aside till further clarifications and further reconciliations can be made. And that may be through letters that are coming to you months after the return was filed. It also helps the IRS identify fraudulent returns that others may have filed on your behalf, sort of the identity theft scenario. So, certainly the IVO organization plays an important role in revenue protection. And you would want a return stopped if somebody with access to your Social Security number and your wage and withholding information decided to steal your refund. But that's less the instance of people, not double checking the return or not including all their W-2s or not including 1099s. That's going to be readily apparent to the people at the integrity and verification operation, necessitating that return being pulled. And again, being put aside for really an indeterminate amount of time. Next slide, please. So you do need to double check that your information is correct for you, for your spouse, and for your dependents. Of particular importance there is the Social Security number. It's easy to make a keystroke error if you're working on some software or using a computer to complete your return. It's also easy to make a mistake in pen or pencil when writing down numbers. That happens. That's why pencils come with erasers. The important thing is to double check the information before you send it in. Next slide, please. Yeah, you want to make sure that you have all your credits and deductions for which you will be eligible. The IRS traditionally scrutinizes credits and deductions that you've taken to see that they're appropriate. They're really not looking for credits and deductions that you may be eligible for, right? This is sort of your opportunity to tell the government, here's what I believe I'm eligible for, and you don't want to shortchange yourself. Next slide, please. So there's lots of family-related credits available to taxpayers. A complete listing is found at the link sort of in the middle and underlined on the slide, but we're going to go through a couple of those. And the reason the ones that Janice and Asia and I have chosen are the ones where we see taxpayers making the most mistakes on. So we'll go to the next slide, please. The 2021 third economic impact payment and the recovery rebate credit So if you did not receive your third economic impact payment, or if it was for the correct amount, you do have an opportunity to claim it on your 1040 as a recovery rebate credit, okay? Whether using a 1040 or the 1040 SR for senior citizens. Now, I read with great interest yesterday that the Commissioner of the Internal Revenue Statement Revenue Service has made a conclusive statement that all taxpayers, well, I guess the way he phrased it was, they're no longer issuing any third economic impact payments. Those had to be sent out by December 31st, 2021. I think he wanted that read as if you were eligible, you would have received that, but we know that's not always the instance. So you're going to have an opportunity to get that payment. If you didn't get it, maybe it was mailed and it was intercepted or sent to an old address. IRS records are saying, well, we sent it. But we know that frequently that doesn't mean you received it. There could also have been old direct deposit information that the service had, or that Social Security had. We exchange information. We try to send payments to the correct bank account, but bank accounts get closed for a variety of reasons, and you may not be in receipt of that payment. Don't lose hope. There's an opportunity for you to claim the credit on your 1040 or 1040 SR this filing season. Okay, again, we've linked to some helpful resources on the right hand of the slide. Next slide, please. Okay, there's also been enhancements made to the child tax credit by way of an advanced child tax credit. The American Rescue Plan of 2021 both increased the amount of the child tax credit and also made it refundable. We have the limits there: $3,000 for qualifying children between ages and 16, $3,600 for children age 5 and under. The trigger date is to determine the age of your child is 12/31/21. Next slide, please. So what's really been which was extremely unique this past year is that Congress allowed taxpayers to receive up to 50% and the 50% of their anticipated child tax credit in advance monthly payments between July and December. Okay, that hadn't been done before. Folks have always clamored saying it's great to get $6,000 or $7,000 in March or April of the year after I was eligible for these credits, but it might be more beneficial to put money, or at least part of that credit, in people's hands on a monthly basis. Okay, that's the purpose of the advance child tax credit. And taxpayers did have the option to unenroll if they did not want to receive those monthly payments in July, August, September, October, November, and December. If you did opt into that program, if you prefer to get the monthly payments, you will have to reconcile what it is you received with what it was you were ultimately entitled to on a form. Again, the form's not important because you can always refer back to this. I'm just for an awareness purposes, is that if you are a recipient or your client's a recipient, or someone who's been a recipient of the monthly payments that were issued through the summer, fall, and early winter, those will have to be reconciled on your 1040 this year. Next slide, please. Okay, so and this is a cautionary tale. This is something we haven't had experience with because we never had to use this reconciliation device because you were never able to get monthly payments for your advanced child tax credit. But we know it's going to be a potential pitfall for taxpayers, so we wanted to include it in this presentation. If the monthly payment amount that you record on your Form 8821 doesn't match the amounts that the IRS has suggested you receive via their letter 6419, again, that's going to be dropped in a bucket. Your processing your return will stop. There's going to be need further clarification from you, necessitating more more mail, US mail, and more time delays. Okay, so concurrent with the commissioner's statement that all the economic impact payments have been made, he's also assured the public, the practitioner community, his congressional stakeholders, as well as the general public, that these letters, again, the number's not important. The 6419, that's not important. But what's important is that taxpayers who received a monthly advance payment should have by now been notified of what it is that we expect to see on your 1040 as it relates to advance payments received. Okay, so you can't say I didn't get any. I'm going to take the whole credit on my tax return when IRS has provided you a record of payments on the 6419. Next slide, please. Earned income tax credit. Again, we're going to go over some potential pitfalls. There is an income limit. So you want to make sure that you look at the EIT assistance tool. That there's also an ability to compute it yourself to make sure to look at your eligibility based on your income in the instructions to the 1040. That's a sort of, you're doing it longhand. If you were to access the EIT assistant, it's interactive and it's quite accurate. Okay, to claim the credit, you must have Social Security numbers for yourself and your spouse if it's a married filing joint return, and all qualifying children before the due date of the return. Okay, so you need to get out to the Social Security Administration and get Social Security numbers for children that you're claiming for purposes of the earned income credit. There's restrictions on filing status. You must use married filing joint, head of household, qualifying widow or widower, or single. Okay. Married filing single status taxpayers have strict eligibility requirements that we're not going to cover today. They're quite in depth. You must be a U.S. citizen or resident alien for the entire year. And you must meet rules for those without a qualifying child or have a qualifying child. So earned income tax credit is available, again, under limited circumstances for those without a qualifying child. And if you do have a qualifying child, again, there's some complicated rules. So just, again, this is an awareness thing that if you're preparer or you're self-preparing your return, you believe you're eligible for the earned income tax credit. We're trying to raise awareness that there's errors commonly made in the computation of the credit. So you want to, again, double check what it is you're reporting to the Internal Revenue Service. Next slide, please.
Jim, it looks like we might have a question here. I'm going to try to unmute the individual. It's Cynthia. So Cynthia, go ahead and speak. I think you can. You'd have to unmute yourself. Cynthia, are you there? If you are, unmute yourself and you're welcome to ask a question. Oh, your hand was removed. Okay.
Okay. and again, if you can always use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen or the chat. But anyway, so this is a quick recap of the prior screen, which is, you have to have earned income. You cannot have Investment income greater than $10,000. We need valid Social Security numbers contained on the return. Again, there's certain AGI limitations based on your filing status surrounding the amount of earned income credit you're entitled to, and you have to be a citizen or resident alien for the entire year. I think what's most important about this slide is on the right, where we talk about the tools for you, EIT assistance. We have an additional, in my organization, the Taxpayer Advocate Service, we also have an EITC help page. And then, of course, we also link to the EITC pages for information that's been put out by the Internal Revenue Service. Next slide, please. Okay, I see, Janice, that someone had asked, what are the, we do not have that slide. We do not have the adjusted gross income. We have the link. The EIT assister will provide the adjusted gross income limits. I hope that answered the question sufficiently. I don't know but if we would go back one slide. Okay, the first tool, the EITC assistant, does contain detailed, once you put in your AGI and your spouse's AGI and the AGI of any children who may have earned income, that's going to determine the eligibility and more specifically the amount of the credit available to the taxpayers. Okay, so that link will help. And on the next slide, Asia, please, there's additional links at the bottom, I believe. So, common errors. Again, this is we're in the Taxpayer Advocate Service. We work lots of earned income credit denials, reductions, and taxpayers are adamant that they're entitled to full credit or they're entitled to more of the credit than the service is allowed. And when we look at the return and we look at the IRS's determination, we're able to say, well, here's where the error that was made. Claiming a child who does not meet residency or relationship requirements. That's a big one. You may care for your next door neighbor's child while the parents are at work and feel as though you're entitled to take the credit because the child's eating 3 meals at your house. Sometimes they sleep over because they're friends with your friend and it's a single parent living next door. But again, you're not going to meet the residency test. The child's the resident of a household next to you. You don't meet the relationship requirements. You haven't adopted that child. The child's not a birth child. Reporting income or expenses incorrectly. Again, we talked about how you need earned income. Folks that have children, qualifying children who may not be working, will sometimes realize that if they are able to show income on a tax return, they'll be eligible for a larger credit or a full credit for each of their children. And they'll, on the tax return, they'll say, well, I don't have any W-2s or 1099s, but I'm a dog walker or I do dog grooming. We have a case in our inventory now where a person said, well, I'm a dog walker, and the IRS is going to want the appointment book. They're going to see the deposits in the bank account to substantiate that you, in fact, did have that business and that your income is being reported correctly. So if you can't substantiate the income that you're reporting, that return will be pulled for further scrutiny. Also, single folks and head of household status tend to be eligible for a larger credit. Taxpayers are aware of that. So they'll leave one of the spouses off the return and file single or head of household when they're in fact married and been filing jointly for many, many years. Marital status changes, but again, for the time being, that return would be pulled until we can gain a better understanding as to whether you were entitled to the filing status that you reported. Again, because historically you filed married filing jointly and got a reduced earned income credit. Now you're getting the full credit as a head of household. What's changed? Big one is the name and social security number errors. Again, typically the social security piece is a transposition of numbers or a keystroke error when you're completing your tax return. Name change, you may have went, down to the courthouse and had your name changed. Okay, you never liked your first name, you want to change it. You don't like your middle name, you want to change it. If that information, if you have not forwarded that information to the Social Security Administration, and we used our database to cross-check the names of taxpayers, that's going to be, return's going to be pulled. Of course, you're entitled to change your name, and you've taken all the legally appropriate steps to change your name. But if you haven't alerted governmental agencies of that name change, it's going to cause a delay. And typically you'd say, well, that's not that big a problem. I've got the document from the clerk, and but there's so much, the IRS is so backed up that a simple thing like proving your name, again, you're going to have to do that through correspondence, will take months and months and months. And the last bullet's the most important one. Okay, it's the link that talks about credits and deductions with great specificity, but there's also a piece specifically on the earned income tax credit and some of the common errors that we've covered, we're covering today. Next slide, please. Okay, so there's other credits for which you may be eligible. Again, for a much broader overview of those credits, we encourage you to look at the credits and deductions for individuals. Link at the bottom of the slide. The next slide, please. So, there's tax credits available to taxpayers for each year qualifying dependents who, for whatever reason, can't be claimed for the child tax credit. That's typically because their income levels would be too high, but I think there's been a recognition in Congress that even the quote unquote middle class unquote taxpayers who have children are still spending significant amounts on their health and well-being. So there is a maximum credit amount of $500 for each dependent. Again, we're going to use a form to justify access to that credit. Again, it's primarily going to look at the AGI, and it's going to look to make sure that the dependent meets certain tests. Next slide, please. Educational expenses. Again, that's a rather new legislatively implemented provision. Or legislatively, it was enacted by Congress, and we're implementing that particular piece. It's the second or third year. We're not really having very many issues pop up with educational expenses because there's, we put a reporting condition on the educational institutions. Okay, so if you are claiming educational expenses on your tax return, you need to have been issued a 1098-T tuition statement from the educational institution. Again, because they have a requirement to send those to us. Okay. So if you're claiming an expense and we're matching that, cross-referencing that expense against the 1098-Ts we received from that particular educational institution, it needs to match. Or again, the return's gonna be pulled out of the pipeline. It's going to be put in the educational expense bucket, and someone will get to it, when they can. Next slide, please. Charitable contribution deductions. Again, taxpayers can get tripped up on this. If you do not itemize on your tax return, there's a $300 limit made to qualifying charities. If you're married filing jointly, it's $600. If you do itemize on your tax return, again, there's going to be limits that you're eligible, that you'll get credit for on your tax return, and that's based again on your AGI as to how much of a credit you're going to get for what it is that you've contributed. Next slide, please. Premium tax credit. Again, this is more of we have lots of these cases in our inventory, and again, it's failure to include the form, okay, that substantiates that, yes, you paid your health share premium in this amount on the following months. Okay, so the form is, again, it's not important that you know the form number, the 8966, but it must be submitted if you're claiming the premium tax credit. And again, you should have already received a form from your provider that tells you, if it covers the 12 months. Some months are missed, all right? Sometimes you don't have the money to make the premium, but it's going to provide an accounting for the premiums that you paid in calendar year 2021. And tax returns will be delayed if the credit's claimed, but your form 8962 is either not attached or it's not accurate. It doesn't reconcile with the information we've received from the provider via their form 1095s. And again, on the right, there's some important links to help you get additional information should you be in a position to claim the premium tax credit. Next slide, please. So this circles back to attaching all required forms and schedules before you submit your return. And I must say, I'm surprised at the amount of work that we have in our office right now, where taxpayers are not attaching required forms and schedules. And again, what's unfortunate is they have it and it's accurate, but they didn't attach it. And the return goes into a bucket, and then you'll never find it unless you reach out to us in the Taxpayer Advocate Service and say, I understand I was missing this form. I sent it to IRS. My refund's still not been issued. And well, that's because, they've obviously opened up the tax return, but they haven't opened the subsequent correspondence from you, which contained the missing form. Okay. And because of that, it really heightens the frustration taxpayers have with their government and with their tax agency, because you're entitled to the full refund. The entire refund's frozen until we get the forms that justify you're taking a particular credit. So it goes back to double checking. It goes back to making sure you attach all required forms and schedules. It highlights the point that Asia and Janice will cover in a little bit, which is to make sure that you use a reputable tax preparer. And I'm going to touch upon that a little bit too, who will do that double checking, who will make sure all required forms and schedules are attached, who oftentimes, based on certain incomes, are able to provide services, or we can provide you access to services that'll do that tax preparation for free. Next slide, please. So, finding tax return preparation help. And I know that Janice and I have talked about this both in outreach events and privately. We're both using tax preparation software to help us get through this. Okay. And that there's a cost, and it might be $40 this year, but it assures the accuracy, and it also ensures that you're getting those deductions and credits that you're entitled to. So there is free help for tax preparation. There is free help for the preparation of a federal income tax return. We've got VITA sites, the Volunteer Income Tax Assistance Program. They're out in hundreds of communities in Maryland, frequently in conjunction with churches, with libraries, other social service providers. We also have tax counseling for the elderly that does return preparation. I believe there's a cap on the age for gaining access to that program. There's links to what to bring. Okay, when you're visiting those sites, there's also a locator link to see, geographically who's closest to you. If you want to go to a tax professional, that's fine. We do suggest you access the link for our directory of federal tax return preparers who we believe have the credentials and the qualifications required to provide an accurate and fully substantiated tax return, which would result in no delays, hopefully, in getting a return processed. And again, my organization, which is part of IRS, we're sort of your voice within IRS. We also have Get Help pages that can be linked accordingly at the bottom of this particular slide. Next slide, please.
Jim, there's a question referencing sending additional required documents. If you later send the required forms, what is the best way to ensure that the IRS merges the documents?
There really is none. I hope they get it. I hope that the inclusion of my personally identifiable information will lead in particular the Social Security number, will lead the IRS to include this particular information, scan it, and put it on the appropriate databases for folks. Should you subsequently call in, they'll have it. So 5 or 6 years ago, I would suggest you call them and say, I sent this 3 weeks ago. Can you confirm that it's been associated with my case? And they would look and say either yes or no. And if no, can you fax me a copy right now? The answer is typically yes, though. These are unprecedented times the last couple of years, not only COVID related, but there's been problems with the United States Postal Service that we're very, very well aware of. I wouldn't even suggest you try to call level of service. What's it, 21%. So only, 2 of 10 taxpayers are getting through, whether it's for a question or whether it's for a confirmation that the information that was requested has been received. At some point, the IRS will completely exhaust all unopened correspondence. So they're behind. Again, if your particularly if the taxpayer involved is experiencing any type of economic hardship, the case would be ripe for my assistance. But we also have criteria under systemic burden, where practitioners come in and say, my taxpayer is not under any financial duress right now. They've got enough to pay their bills. They're still working, but it's somewhat outrageous that it's taken a year for this return to be processed. And it's been 7 months since they told us what it is that was needed, which we sent the very next day. I do have the right to finality. I bring the case in under systemic burden criteria, which is really real relevant to the person. I'm just talking, that's probably too much inside talk. What I'm suggesting is if you've experienced excessive delays, the case meets TAS criteria. But what I would really like to see is if the taxpayer you're referencing is experiencing economic harm, well, then that case needs to be sent over, at the completion of the phone call. So, those of us who do use the software, there's the prior year data as a customer service is already in there. So that's great for your name and your address and your social security number and your spouse's social security number and your children, and that's all accurate. But it also may import prior year wage and withholding information. Okay, that's a question. There's a cautionary tale there. So again, check and double check that the information that's contained, that you've entered into the software is accurate. Of course, there's a preference that you use direct deposit. Again, it's safer, it's quicker. We've certainly found that to be more efficient. You know, we still have cases we're working on now where the taxpayer is an unbanked person. They told us we didn't get the refund. We've checked the databases. The check was never cashed. We've stopped payment on that particular payment. We reissued the check. 6 weeks later, the taxpayer still hasn't received the check. We've confirmed that the check hasn't been cashed. We've stopped payment on the check and reissued another one. I mean, we have the correct address, but we don't know if it's a delays with the postal service or what. So, but you know, it's less of an issue as people have additional options for receipt of their refund. And I think folks are less and less inclined to want to mail documents or ask that unless you have to. I mean, a tax return, there's an option. You can use e-file. The following up on correspondence, like in the Q&A, which or chat, which whatever it was, Q&A, I think was a good point. You know, the IRS sends you a letter and says, I need clarification on this particular item. Please, you know, there's no option for you to email it. There's the only option is there's rarely even a fax number. I mean, I'm not even back to work yet. You know, all local offices are under an evacuation, still under the evacuation order. So the only way to get it is send it to a centralized campus where they have employees and hope that it's opened, scanned, and attached to the electronic case file so it can be looked at. Next slide, please. So again, as a public service, there are people individuals out there who do not file electronically. And if you, a client, a relative, a neighbor, prefer that method of communicating, then we link to, you know, where to file your paper tax return, whether it has a payment attached or not, okay? Because we know folks are comfortable using the mail, despite evidence to the contrary with regards to its efficiency. Next slide, please. Okay, so the IRS has made sort of like, you know, leaps and bounds when it comes to language and accessibility information. We never really did much for non-English speakers and those particularly that had issues with sight. You know, you're talking about the completion of a document that is very, very small print. Lots of errors are made, incidental errors. So they partnered with some of the larger organizations representing both non-English speakers and the folks that have difficulty reading or an inability to read. So next slide, please. So we do have multilingual resources. There's a link at the bottom. Next slide, I think, covered a little more. So if you have a language preference, there's a form for that. Okay, request for change in language preferences. So we're up to, I guess, 20 if you include English, different languages, where if we were able on a somewhat limited basis, that certainly the 1040 would be in that language. And we'll work, the roster of notices, the roster of instructions, the roster of publications in other languages continues to grow. Again, we're far behind the curve. We're far behind where we need to be, but it's a start. Next slide, please. We do have over the phone interpreter services. You know, I've needed to use them in my office. I have no bilingual case advocates in my office. Sometimes cases, talk to the taxpayer, they really prefer a Spanish speaker. So we access our interpretive services through the 1-800 number listed there. You may speak a different, a language other than English or Spanish. Okay, it is another opportunity to access Interpretive Services, so we understand what it is you need to help us resolve your issue. Next slide, please.
Jim, before we
Yeah.
go to leave the language interpreter services and such, let me ask a quick question here. Somebody who does work with low income, limited English proficiency members, they want to make sure that they file for the EITC. Is there something that can better help them to be better prepared? Is there a checklist that on the IRS website, perhaps that they can send to their members so that they can bring all the documents before they come to access services, FIDA or otherwise?
Yeah, I'm not that, I've only used the interpretive services, Janice, and that's really, and it's what happens is, because I've been on those calls, is they're in your own language, they're going to let you know what it is that Jim needs to resolve a particular issue. So it's not really a checklist, it's an actual conversation. It's not like documents or correspondence. It's proof of your Schedule C expenses. And then when that comes in, again, we utilize interpretive services on the inside to say, translate this document, make sure that it is what it is. It is what I need to move the case forward.
But I do think also that the IRS website has additional resources, which also can be translated into multiple language.
That's
or have
correct.
the ability to.
Right.
So the IRS website is a great resource. It has a lot of information, and I think, I do believe that currently that's not just in English. So that might be another resource to find a checklist. I'll have to look for that. Thank you.
Okay. And then we talk about accessible IRS tax products. This is more related to the use of Braille or large print. If you need those, you can call for those, but you can also download it on irs.gov. There's an accessible forms and pubs page. So if you are able to download large print and Braille, and those, it's getting more robust every day, but certainly it includes enough information to help you prepare your tax return. There's thousands of forms and publications, publication to say you've been audited, here's what to do, or you're in the collection stream, here's to do. I don't know if those types of publications have been made accessible for Braille or large print. I suspect they have, but it's just been a while since a taxpayer has asked me to go in and can you ask me to go in, access the form or access the publication and then mail it to them, which of course we would do if we had an open case. So those forms that those publications I mentioned were not ones I was looking for, but the best way to do is, like Janice, like you said, explore the website. There's a drop-down menu. Here's the forms that are available in Braille and large print. Here's the publications that are available in Braille and large print, and it's quite voluminous. Next slide, please.
So I'm looking at the IRS website now, and it looks like you can choose a language, and then it translates the entire website into that other language.
That's right. Okay, so those are good. Again, we're pointed in the right direction. If you need IRS notices and letters, so if there's subsequent activity on your account and you're not able to understand, there is an issue with your return, you've completed it using large print or Braille, but we're not processing the return for any one of a number of reasons, you'll receive a notice. Okay, if you want that in Braille or large print, and this may be a change to how you might have filled out a normal 1040 with a one that's not Braille or large print, because a preparer did it, or your son did it, or you used a third party to do it, and it's not in the 1040 was not sent in on Braille. It was not sent in through large print. There's a subsequent issue with the return. You're responsible for the return. The notices will be sent to you. And you may want to just work that yourself and not go back to the tax preparer or whoever it was. Again, it might have been a sibling. It could have been your son. It could have been your parents. So There is a form that puts us on notice as you file the tax return, which essentially says, if you have any reason to contact me, and again, contact means correspondence, please use, and you choose the option, Braille or large print. Okay, so you would use the Form 9000. It's an alternative media preference. Attach it to your tax return. The goal is that the return just goes through, it's processed, you get your refund. But again, if the service has any scrutiny or questions about the return, if you include that Form 9000, they're going to know to correspond with you using Braille or large print notices. And again, I mean, you can also get assistance through toll free, but again, that's the level of service isn't where it needs to be. So we're trying to raise awareness that there's these other options here available for you to stay off the phone. Next slide, please. We have a dedicated accessibility helpline. That's not the regular toll-free phone assist number that's handling any kind of call. The folks working that 833 number, their only issue in front of them is accessibility issues. Okay, so that's a wonderful resource right there. Next slide, please. All right, I want to make sure that Janice and Asia get through their piece. I'm going to stop here. We'll go to their piece, and then there'll be an opportunity to ask and hopefully answer questions at the end. Asia, do you want to take over now?
Yes, 1 second, let me just start.
Sure.
Okay. All right, thank you, Jim.
You're welcome.
Oops. Okay, so my name is Asia. I'm the taxpayer legal at our low-income taxpayer clinic at Maryland Volunteer Lawyer Service. So my portion of the presentation is just going to be about some red flags that you should be aware of when looking for a reputable tax preparer. So I'm going to ask you a few questions, and if you all want to answer them, you could just put your responses in the Q&A or the chat box. Okay, so first question. A tax preparer promises you the biggest refund you've ever seen if you work with them. Do you A, say heck yeah and schedule your appointment? Do you B, say no thank you and continue your search? Or do you C, send in your wage information and let them handle the rest? What do you think? Okay, got one B. Anyone else? Okay, got one A. What do you all think? Okay, so we got a couple responses. Let me go ahead and reveal the answer. Okay, so the answer was B. You should say no, thank you, and continue your search. So any tax preparer that promises you the biggest refund you've ever seen, that might indicate that this tax preparer may be willing to claim false or fictitious information in order to get you a larger refund, which is illegal. So you don't want to work with a tax preparer that promises you that. Next question. So question 2, you come across an ad on Facebook for a tax preparer. Do you A, reach out to the tax preparer to inquire further? Do you B, check the preparer's history with the Better Business Bureau? Or do you C, check the IRS directory of preparers, or both B and C? What do you all think? Okay, got one D. Got one A. Anyone else? Okay. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and reveal the answer. So the answer is D, both B and C. So you should check the IRS Directory of Preparers, but also the Better Business Bureau. So the IRS Directory of Preparers is not a complete list of tax return preparers, but it does include those who are enrolled agents, CPAs, and also attorneys, as well as those who participate in the annual filing season program. And then it's also important to check a preparer's history with the Better Business Bureau, just to make sure that the preparer is a trustworthy person. Okay, next question. So question 3, your tax preparer asks you to claim credits and deductions you aren't eligible for. So do you A, accept the credits and deductions because that's more money for you? Do you B, stop working with the preparer? Or do you C, not accept any of the credits and deductions, but continue working with the preparer? What do you all think? Okay, 1A, 1B. Okay, another B. Okay, so let's reveal the answer. So the answer is B, you should stop working with that preparer. You should not work with any tax preparer that encourages you to illegally claim or report false or fictitious information. We actually recently had a client who got some bad advice from his tax preparer that he didn't have to report the income that he received from withdrawing from his 401k. And so ultimately he ended up with a tax debt that he was responsible for. So I think it's important to note here that ultimately you will be responsible. So you should make sure, you should do your own research and make sure that the credits and deductions that you're claiming are actually appropriate for you. And that your tax preparer is not illegally claiming any false or fictitious information. So in the next question, your tax preparer asks you to sign a blank or partially filled out tax return and let them handle the rest. So do you A, say no and stop working with the preparer? Do you B, sign the return and let them handle the rest? Or do you C, sign the return and ask to see it before the return is submitted? What do you all think? Okay, so someone said B, I don't want to deal with it. Anyone else have any idea? Okay, let me go ahead and reveal the answer then. So the answer is no, you should, I'm sorry, it's A, you should say no and stop working with the tax preparer. And you should also ensure that the preparer signs and includes their PTIN, which is their preparer tax identification number. So paid tax preparers must have a PTIN to prepare tax returns. And then the final question. So the final question, your household made less than $58,000 last year. Do you A, try filing taxes on your own? Do you B, not